Welcome everyone to our fourth and final seminar of our summer conference season. Really pleased that you're able to join us today, which is going to be a little bit different. I don't know, some of you perhaps have been to others in the week, and some of you may simply have opted for this afternoon to talk about a long-term vision for education in England. And we're very much doing this in conjunction with FED, and that's going to be introduced to you in a moment. But NGA are supporters of FED and the work that's being done to create a long-term vision that's really owned far and wide across not just the education sector, but beyond, because actually we're all invested, aren't we, in society, in the education of our children and what that means for the future. As usual, everything at NGA, I have some of the team behind the scenes with me. So today it's Ella that's moving me on. So if you can do that for me, please, Ella. I think everybody now knows the way in which we run these sessions. Because there are a lot of you today, we will be doing what we've done in previous seminars, so picking questions out of the chat, which I notice is uncharacteristically empty for NGA events. So I hope you're not going to hold back. We're almost slide free this afternoon. They'll still go out with the others on Monday, but this is very much going to be a discussion. So I think it's you know, rather good for the end of the week that you're not going to have PowerPoint fatigue today. However, we do know a lot of you like to save the chat if it really gets going and you're comparing notes, so you can save that yourselves. And before I move on, I do just want to say the thank you for volunteering, because I don't get a chance to see very many of you these days in person. Maybe it's tiny little squares on the screen, but I really want still to be conveying that message from NGA, that we really recognise the amount of time and effort and care that you're putting into governing your schools and your trusts. And what's more is, we do know how tired the whole country is, but schools in particular are. And although you've been supporting your school leaders and your school staff, you're not always being looked out for. So we do hope that despite you coming to our events, adding to the time that you're spending on CPD, that shortly you will also get some time off to recuperate. So please move me on to the next slide. As most of you know, I can't be at an NGA event without mentioning our 2021 campaign, Visible Governance, to raise the profile of the role, those of you who are doing the job, but also the role outside the sector, so that we get people thinking about volunteering who might never otherwise have thought of it. So in a way, working with FED is a way of spreading that message outside schools to say, this is a really great way of making a contribution to the school system. We absolutely need you. 250,000 people, we have to keep recruiting. So I'm sure, Carl, we can do a bit of a deal with FED and make sure some of those visible governance messages go out via you as well, because particularly later this term, we're going to be working with a number of employers and really looking and celebrating those employers who are flexible and help their employees to volunteer. So if you could move me on, please. So I thought, well, we have to mention something that NGA has been doing before I hand over to Carl to introduce FED. So because this session is on vision, and this is a vision for the whole education system, but I thought I'd use it as an opportunity to plug our guidance on school or trust vision and your absolute key role in making sure that there is a vision, values, ethos, strategic direction set alongside your senior leaders. And I hope that many of you being active NGA members will remember last autumn, we republished our Being Strategic guidance along with ASCL and NAHT, because it is so important that governing boards and senior leaders are approaching this really important task in the same way. And this is the term that you will be doing this. I'm saying this very confidently. We know from other events where we've taken polls that many of you have already had your strategy discussions, thinking about your vision for the next school year. And I'm hoping others of you will be fitting that in before the end of term. If you can move me on, please. And anyone who's been here for the rest of the week will know that I use this as an excuse each time also to promote our e-learning, which is being used far and wide now. But we also have an e-learning module on creating a vision for your school of trust. It's one of our bite-sized ones, the smaller ones that subscribers really love. So if you haven't seen that and you have access to Learning Link, please have a look. Could you move me on? That'll be there with the slide set, just to reiterate the incredibly good value that our e-learning package is. And you are all members here today, which means you get a discount for that. So if you're a gold member, £85 buys you e-learning for all your board and your governance professional for a year. And on to the next, please. Some of you will now be bored of me saying this because this might be the third time I've said it, but I'm really pleased that going virtual has had some benefits. We've been able to increase the number of events that we are offering. And one of those new offers is for new members of boards, whether that be the trust board, academy committees, or maintain school governing boards. We're looking at those separately, offering separate sessions. So to complement our induction guides, really to get people off to a good start in their first year. So those of you that are very experienced governors and trustees, please do point your newer members in the direction of these sessions. On to the next. Those are the dates, which I'm not going to go through, but they'll be there for you when you get the slide pack, as will the next slide, which you'll be very pleased that I'm not going to go through. But on Monday, when I mentioned gold membership in the chat, someone said, what's a gold member? So I thought, right, I'm putting that in there to see what benefits there are. And I think now that may be enough for me. Turn, please, onto the next slide. Yes. So now we can move on to the business at hand. And we have 4 members of the FED team, and Carl Ward, who is the chair of FED, executive chair of FED, but also very much the founder and one of the drivers behind FED, is going to speak first and then introduce the rest of his team. But Carl, just before I let you take over the stage, I just wanted to mention the fact that you were really keen that governors and trustees were consulted as part of your consultation about this vision. And there are 4 work streams that I've just put there for the sake of the history as it works. I know you and your colleagues are going to go through those, but I think they're all very much things that those that govern care deeply about: vision, structures, long-term sustainable planning, place-based approaches, really, well, it will be interesting to see what our members say in the chat, but all my conversations with our members over the years, place has always been incredibly important to them, because it's often commitment to that place that is why they volunteer in the first place. And then lastly, your work stream about equity and inclusion. That's been such a big topic of conversation in the governance community over the last few years. And actually at the end of the month, we have a new report coming out on that topic. So I think all things that are going to be of great interest. So thank you so much, Carl, for the work you've been doing with FED. And now I'm going to hand the stage to you and your colleagues.
Thanks, Emma, and great to be invited to your summer conference seminar series. Very much always enjoy working with NGA, and like you've said, governance is an important part of the work of the FED. So you've highlighted there actually 4 work streams that will take us over the next year into the second year of the FED. But my job to start with today is just to introduce the FED a little bit, and then pass on to my colleagues that are helping me drive the vision and idea of the FED's work. But I wanted to take you back actually to pre-COVID. The pandemic was a film. About 4 years ago, perhaps a little bit longer now, I was very fortunate to become the president of the Association of School and College Leaders, and NGA works closely with them as partners. And every president, and that lasts for a year, has to have in that role a theme. And my theme for the year of presidency was the country needs a long-term plan for education. I've worked in the education sector now for the best part of 28 years. And during that time, I've seen lots of changes, and I've seen not much by the way of long-term planning. Whereas in schools, and very successful schools, then we see long-term planning take place. We see a head usually that's there for a long time. And I'm sure Paul Dreschler, those early days when I was ASCL president, Paul was president of the CBI at the time. And we worked together to try and get the concept of the fact that in anything successful was crucial, and therefore long-term planning in the future of our education system, the very foundation of the economy and our success as a country, is crucial also. So during that year, about halfway through it, I was in the stages of rushing across the country and going from one place to another before we knew what Zoom was, other than potentially a song that I heard on the radio this morning, by the way. And I'd got 2 children, and at the time they were very young. Morgan, my youngest, said to me, and he was about 6 at the time, "Dad, you're a president, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "A bit like Barack Obama." That's how long ago it was, because we've had Donald Trump since. And I said, "No, son, not like Barack Obama." But he said, "Surely you can do something having the title president." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Because school is really boring, Dad." And he actually articulated it very well as to why. Doing too much maths and English, not enough history, geography, art and sport, by the way, was his articulation. But I guess that's a 6-year-old boy might say. And it made me think at the time, actually, if I've got a little bit of power, and it's only a little bit as president of ASCL for a year, try and use it for something for the good that's morally right, like the need for a long-term plan in the country. And then I was very fortunate, as I said, to work with Paul Dreschler, president of the CBI, and 1 or 2 other people, Sir Michael Barber, Dame Julia Cleverden, who also believed we should do the same. And over the next couple of years, we got together on numerous occasions and talked about how we could drive that forward. Because it's not my idea. The idea of a long-term plan for education has been around for a while. And what most people usually say is, that's a really good idea and we should have one. But that's really difficult, you know, because connecting with politicians and education over a long-term plan, when we operate in a cycle of 5 years elections, But when children go through education for 15 years, well, you as governors will know what I mean there in terms of the dichotomy between the two. But we decided that although it was hard to do, we should still have a go at trying influencing the system to do it. We shouldn't be avoiding the hard task. Started about a couple of years ago now to decide that we were going to launch something formal called the Foundation for Education Development, a vehicle that is independent and neutral to bring people together to talk about the future of education. And in doing so, to act like as an umbrella organisation that was only interested in one thing, a long-term plan for education. We did it pre-COVID. We launched it in December 2019, and we were in a good number of sessions launches with real interest. Then COVID hit, of course, 4 months later. And in March, we locked down. And then all of a sudden, after a couple of months, everyone wanted to talk about for education. And we were inundated. We put all our work online, and we were inundated with the need to want to do something. So we were in the process when we launched in December 2019 of having a consultation process to find out what people thought, to help us guide our thoughts on long-term planning in education and find the need for such. Well, all I can say is, looking back over the last 18 months, we've gone 4 years distance in a year. It's gone hugely successful. More and more people have got to know about what the Fed is trying to do and support the Foundation for Education Development. We launched the first ever National Education Summit a few months back. It ended up being the biggest education summit this country's ever seen, over 4 days online, with everybody who's anybody in education and politics and business wanting to speak at it. We followed that up with our national consultation report, the only report done on any education system in a pandemic in the history of the world. By luck, by the way, because we didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but it captured the picture of our education system. Pandemic, quite unique in its approach because it was qualitative. It was speaking to people, finding out what they thought about our education and the changes that were needed. And that report highlighted some key things. It created the 4 work streams that Emma talked about at the start, 4 crucial work streams that have been guided to that space by the broadest education consultation the country's ever seen, not created by a few people in a room. And not just out of COVID-19, but out of the bigger picture of our education system. And that consultation was broad because it involved every type of stakeholder in our education system: governance, parents, carers, students, business leaders, education leaders, politician leaders, community leaders, the full spectrum. But the outcome of our report was pretty simple, really. It wasn't rocket science. That short-termism prevents our education system from addressing its big issues. That a long-term plan is needed to allow our education system, and therefore our country, to be ready for the big challenges of the future. And there has never been a time to want to do that more so than now. The challenges of Brexit, the challenges of COVID recovery are all there for us to see. So how we do that together, and indeed the title of our report is Building Forward Together, has never been more important for our country. And I say that also as a parent. I've got 2 boys. One's 14 and one's just turned 12. And part of the work we're doing now has me as a parent who's got a vested interest in that, in trying to move our education system forward, our economy forward, our country forward. So I've got to say, as a parent, those young boys have a chance in the future when they get to 20 to do what they want to do. So you can find all you want out about the Fed by going to our website. We are completely open and transparent. You can find 12 secretaries of state for education talking about why we need a long-term plan. Those amongst us might say, why did they do that when they were in power? But there we are. They now would like to see it. You can find every piece of video from our National Education Summit on there, so you can go back and view it at your leisure. And you can get involved in everything the Fed is doing in the future by going to the website and registering for our newsletter that comes out every Sunday. And in that, you find out all the seminars that we're running throughout the year. So that's a little bit about where the Fed has come from, what we're doing now, what we're looking to achieve over time. But one other thing I should say, the Fed isn't going to be around forever. We've given ourselves a sunset clause of 3 years, although it is about 6 months longer than that now because of the impact of the COVID crisis. We're in our start of our second year now. And in the next 2 years, we want to see the development of a long-term plan in the English education system to help unlock potential for our children, our communities, and our country, and our future success. Do by June 2022 is have our next National Education Summit that will showcase our second national consultation report, the thing that we hope you will get more involved with. And that second consultation report will highlight the 4 work streams, the work in those 4 work streams, a national planning framework for a long-term plan for education. And each one of those 4 work streams will have a deep report that will provide a approach to what we see needs to be achieved. The Fed is not about creating a long-term plan. It is not ours to do. It is all ours to do. The Fed is about enabling us all to come together to understand why we need one and what should be in it. So thank you very much for spending the last 10 minutes listening to me there. It is now my great pleasure to introduce 3 of my colleagues in the Fed that have helped me drive the Fed forward. The first colleague that's going to join us today in conversation is Paul Dreschler. Paul continues to be a huge force for good in business and education. He was the president, does a huge amount of things now, and is a founding Fed Council member, along with myself, for the Foundation for Education Development. I will also introduce now Patrick Wall, who's a Fed trustee. He helps us govern the Fed and drive the strategy of the Fed forward. He has a rich history in business and education, and also has an organisation called EdPol that's done some groundbreaking work in looking at the way policy is developed in education over a period of time. And Anne Lim, who is just a force of nature. Anne is in a range of education things over time, mainly in the college sector and above. But she is a Fed ambassador. In fact, she is the co-chair, along with Julia Cleverdon, for the Fed National Ambassador Group, and will also be co-chairing Workstream 3, which is about place-based education and the development for levelling up. Indeed, Patrick Wall is also co-chairing Workstream 2 for us as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Dreschler and ask him to say his few words to the conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. And may I say I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to have on one screen so many school governors. Before I make my comments about the Fed, I would just like to say I spent a lot of time in recruitment and promotion of people to boards. And I always say that one of the most valuable experiences that you can get in preparation for a business board role is as a school governor. So I commend all the work that you're doing. I think it's an excellent role to take, not only in terms of positive impact for school and society, but in terms of just wider personal development. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and reminded of my happy days many years ago when I had a similar role. But look, I want to just say a few words about the Fed and education. It was a great Mahatma Gandhi that said, "The future depends on what you do today." So I guess one of the big questions that I think is around is, what are we as an adult population going to do to ensure that the next generation gets as good a hand of cards and at least as good a set of opportunities in life as we have done as leaders. Now, when it comes to education, I want to declare up front, I stand in awe of professionals in education, and I never make the argument that in business we're experts in education. Far from it. I don't think we're in any position to tell people how to run schools or how to educate children. But I do think we have a lot that we can bring to the table. From my experience chairing the business in the community education leadership team, I learned that the skills in business of leadership and governance, enterprise and employability, curriculum knowledge, and our general experience of running organizations is a valuable support and contribution to the school environment. And in fact, that's where I think governors can play a very valuable role in bringing different and valuable experience into the boardroom in schools. But I do think there's another thing about business. Whilst I'm not going to tell Carl and his colleagues how to teach children, I do think from the world of business, we can provide positive insights into what the future challenges and opportunities are and what that might mean for children's knowledge and skills. For sure, a really important endeavor in business has to be clarity on long-term vision and strategy on how that vision is realized. In fact, in business, as many of you know, strategy is the essential ingredient of a successful business. So we need to have strategy that's well developed, rigorous, and at times we use very sophisticated strategic processes. However, common to all this strategy, and Emma outlined this in her introduction, is this sense of vision, clarity on where do we need to be? What do we need from our education system in 10 years' time? What is our longer term vision? A rigorous analysis of what are the changes, what are the scenarios, and what are the risks in our journey to realize that vision? What are the key actions that we need to take to make it happen? And importantly, identification of the resources, people, time, money to achieve and adapt along the way. And as I was looking at the world of education during my time with the CBI, one thing that absolutely blew me away was in this country in the past 60 years, I think now we have had 35 secretaries of state for education. The average tenure of the boss, less than 2 years. None of us could run a business, an enterprise, or organization if the person at the top was changing at that frequency. Why do we think in the world of education we can have a fantastically successful system if the leader changes at that frequency? So it's that particular issue that interests me in terms of the work of the Fed, which is ultimately how do we have, if we have a clear vision and a clear strategy, what sort of governance are we going to have to ensure that we execute well and achieve the goal we want? But before I close, I want to come back to what do I think that we can bring to the Fed process over the next year or so from the world of business. I think what we can do is bring excitement, inspiration, but clarity about what are the big issues that the world is going to face and for which the education system is the only means by which we can address these issues. It was the great Nelson Mandela that said, education is the most powerful weapon with which you can change the world. But when you look today and say, what are our big issues? Climate change, disease, better healthcare, ending poverty, achieving peace, developing products, services, and solutions that people want and need. How do you do that without delivering from the education system children who have the mix, the combination of knowledge and skills required? And these challenges, by the way, they're even greater going forward than they were as many of us were growing up and in school. Climate change is approaching so rapidly that we need to get better and better and smarter and faster at finding solutions, or climate change will pass us out. We've seen with the pandemic the progress that we've made in science and health and the speed at which we can develop solutions. But the next pandemic mightn't be so kind to us. So we need brilliant scientists, brilliant innovation, brilliant creativity, and that comes from human beings. And even if you think artificial intelligence will help us solve many of these problems, who feeds the artificial intelligence but the human beings themselves? So I think when I look at this work of the Fed, is the most important thing that we have to do in this country, secure its place in the world, its future in the world, and a safe, healthy environment, is to ensure that we have an education system that exceeds those requirements. I think we also can bring to what's wanted from the education system clarity on the sort of skills. I mean, I have views on what subjects you can learn, but I will leave that to the educationalists. I do think if you cannot read or write, or if you don't have the basic digital skills, your chances of success in life are much diminished. But again, I leave it to the people in education to decide what to teach. But if you can't read, you can't write, you know, digital skills, you have a major disadvantage in the 21st century. But other subjects can enrich your life. But there are a set of skills, and I've been involved in the skills agenda for many years. I chaired the Skills Funding Agency. I had the pleasure of chairing Teach First, and I'm satisfied that we can articulate what the skills required are. And to my mind, they fall into three categories: listening, speaking, problem solving, creativity, staying positive and aiming higher, and leadership and teamwork. And we need children who come out of the education system that have that mix, that can play those different tunes, that are able to arrive at the workplace work ready, which is one of the greatest sources of concern for employers today. They're not concerned about children's ability in terms of academic subjects, but the level of concern about work readiness is particularly high. So look, in closing, I passionately believe that every child, no matter their background, needs and deserves to have the opportunity to realize their full potential. In fact, we have already committed to that in our signature of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And as long as we don't deliver on it, we're failing to meet one of our global obligations. So I think children deserve our best effort. I think education should be the highest priority in the government. And if you change the boss every 2 years, what you tell me is you haven't got that right up there on the priority list. So that means from government and from all of us as leaders, we need to respect and value teachers. We need consistent leadership and high quality governance, delivering against a high quality long-term strategy. And for me, that's what the Fed is all about. I'm delighted to be part of it. And I'll just remind you that it was Malcolm X that said, education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. And that's what Carl Ward is doing. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much. Patrick, can I pass over to you?
Thanks very much, Paul. You must forgive me, I don't have Paul's rhetorical flourish. I'm more of the process guy. But at the same time, in my defense, I think that's probably very important in terms of what we're looking at for long-term planning and a vision for education. Just out of interest, my background, I've been involved in school governorship over 30 years. I've had 22 years direct experience, but going back right to the local management of schools at the end of the 80s. I've been a governor in Birmingham in London as a business representative, as a community representative, and a local authority representative. And as Carl said, I've got a particular interest in policy development. I think we're all aware as governors, and as Carl mentioned, schools suffer the consequences of chopping and changing in policy. A great school works on a natural rhythm. A great head teacher and principal and senior leadership team know that that rhythm and that regularity, the predictability allows new teachers to come in, for them to flourish, for them to learn their trade, and for them to take ownership of their work. We have to protect that environment in what is really quite a delicate ecosystem. So what is the relevance of long-term planning? It's to fulfill the purpose and vision that Paul was talking about. We have a process in FED in Workstream 1 to consult widely and to consider deeply how we can get to agreement on the vision for education, not least looking at how that works in many other countries around the world. But Paul talked about the changed environment, about AI, technology, making people work ready, and digital. Those are environmental factors, a change in society. He talked about a secure place for people in the world, for the UK in the world, a safe and healthy environment, making sure we got basic skills, about making sure we don't diminish the chance of anybody, and talking about realizing people's full potential regardless of background. So we will have a vision and purpose for education as part of this process. My focus is on how can a long-term plan, as an improvement plan in a school, help us mechanically to achieve those outcomes. And that is a discipline, and it is a process. And for people on the call today who are involved in business, Paul said, many of you will be used to that, but also people in the public sector. The amazing thing is most people work with planning rigor. Most people appreciate that that is critical to achieve outcomes with a minimum of disruption, to build on what is good, to make good great, and to gradually retire things which aren't appropriate and can be replaced with something better, and with agreement, so it helps those who are delivering on the front line. If you think of the ecosystem that we have in education, 24,000 schools, 500,000 teachers, 9 million students, it is massively complex. It takes over £90 billion a year in resources, and yet there is no long-term plan. Education, National Health Service has a 10-year plan. In other long-term departments like energy, defence, there is a long-term plan. Now, things are shifting, but the question is, how do we get agreement around that? And one of the great things the Fed is doing, I believe, with Carl's leadership, is bringing together people across parties so that we can have a longer-term horizon. So just as we might with an improvement plan in a school, think about the steps, so we need to think of that for education as a whole. As you will all be aware, typically a plan, when we start with a vision and purpose, we take stock of where we are now. There's an audit of what is good, what is not so good. We think about a gap analysis. Where are the areas where we're going to have to reach furthest? Where are the areas where we talk about evolution? Are there some things that maybe need revolution? And then, most importantly, we have to consider priorities. Because one of the things that schools have suffered from over the last 30 years that I'm aware of are priorities coming in together, not being coordinated properly, pulling teachers and assistants, college lecturers in different directions. So the most important priorities aren't necessarily achieved. They get lost in the noise and in the confusion. So priorities are critical. From this, we can develop a plan of action over time, and then we come into implementation. Again, implementation often, I have to say, I have to be critical in this respect, but with respect to the complexity of people in the government and the DFE, but implementation is often thought of at the last stage and doesn't have the focus and the resources. But very often, the how we do something and the who does it is important as the what, and making sure that the who, that those who are involved, are given sufficient time and resources to implement change. So all of these things need to be considered in a long-range plan. I'm sure I'm teaching many of you to suck eggs there. We have many models out there in different sectors, private and public, and overseas, that we can draw upon to create a template and to build agreement around. Critically, though, and probably most challenging, across parties. Having said that, I think with education, there are particular challenges, and I'll just mention two of them in this introduction. One is about the interdependence between the different levers that we have in education. If you take one area like curriculum, and Cambridge Assessment have done a lot of work on this, you have to consider how curriculum changes many other areas. Clearly, curriculum assessment work in tandem, but it also influences initial teacher training, continual professional development. We have to think about internal curriculum cohesion, as the people know here as experienced governors. If you change exams at 16, you have to go back to stage 3, maybe stage 2, to make sure that you have the right sequencing within your curriculum. You need to ensure that people are given the time and resource, I say again. Now compare that with what happened in 2011, 2013, 14, curriculum change. We had changes with Ofqual, change in thresholds. We had changes in our examination systems, moving from some continuous assessment to all summative assessment. And we also had things introduced like preference for EBAC, Progress 8. What that's done as unintended consequence is narrow our curriculum and made the curriculum harder to access for many people. It's had a consequence on teacher motivation. And 2017 DFE report said that the second most significant reason teachers were leaving the profession, a third within 5 years, is to do with the amount of policy change. And that was off the back of those considerable changes 2011 to 2014. The number one, you wouldn't be surprised, number one reason is teacher workload, which again, we're all aware of, and again, is a lot to do with policy change. So it's critical to get this right, but we need to understand that the planning has to take into account the interdependence of all of the different levers that we can use. And that is not just curriculum assessment, it's accountability, it's the measurement, it's how we judge schools, it's the level of competition, system structures, teacher training, CPD, funding, and regional and local. We will talk about that a bit more. The other, just one other point about how difficult this is a question of whose evidence do we use? So as we assess where we are and we think about where we want to get to, who do we listen to and who do we involve? We see very different approaches to this around the world. Some countries are quite ideologically based and use maybe just the evidence of some experts, some standard advisory committees, national authorities that have been there for 20 years. Others are talking much more to practitioners and to stakeholders, not only business, but to parents and to students. There have been some very interesting examples in home nations in Scotland and Wales over the last few years. So there are many things for us to learn from, but we need to remember that the process is going to partly determine the outcome. So unless we talk about how we want to do this, we can't just jump in. We have to have a discussion about who do we want to listen to and where do we actually weight evidence, and how important do we take into account different views. So those are just two things for us to consider. And I'll talk then finally a little bit about the governance of the process, because again, how we govern it is going to determine the outcome. I mentioned some other countries, and you can see around the world, again, very different approaches. Some countries, China, Singapore, can be regarded as relatively authoritarian. Some are top-down and democratic, like Japan and Korea. Some are very participatory, as we talked about Finland, New Zealand, Wales, but interesting in Finland, New Zealand, the curriculum is quite tight and rigid in terms of advice, but schools actually have latitude in terms of how much they can implement this. We talk about that in the UK, and I'm surprised at how often I hear in England that schools have autonomy around curriculum. But again, I think governors will recognise that if you have a high stakes accountability and you're being judged on 4+, and that is going to determine your school role and your funding, you have to be very careful if you're going to step outside of the bounds of the curriculum. So the system can be loaded by other levers. And then we also have countries, because they're federal states like Australia and Canada, which are using, there's much more local authority. Our local authorities have been reduced in power. We have to ask, is there a role for them for a middle tier in the way that we bring about policy change and governance? So there are different models. In England, we actually have probably a unique position. So much is done ad hoc, and increasingly we have reduced or closed national institutions, representative bodies. As Carl and Paul said, we have a lot of change in the centre. Paul talked about 35 Secretary of States. In the last 20 years, in the last 40 years, we've had 20 Secretary of States, we've had over 100 ministers, and clearly we don't get that stability in the middle of government, nor do we necessarily get it in the DFE when there is an issue with institutional memory. The question is, can non-governmental organisations such as the Fed, working with a wide coalition of other partners, provide a credible long-term voice and long-term plan to work with government, to work with the DFE, to create something which takes us outside of, as Carl and Paul said, the 2 to 5 year churn of ministers and governments, and more in tune with the perspective, the experience of students, which is 16 years, and the experience of parents, which can be up to 25 years after 3 children have cycled through education. All of that needs a coherence. It needs a long-term plan. I've talked about just a few of those areas. Our program now is to say, how can we create structures and governance for a long-term plan in order to fulfill the purpose and vision which Paul, Carl, and other people in the team will be working with others to create. As I said, it's slightly the dry end of the process, but anything that is large and complex and delicate and interrelated needs to have long-term planning, and we have to find an agreed structure to achieve that. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks very much. I'm going to pass on now to Anne.
Well, thank you, Carl. Great to be with you all today. I am, of course, number 5 in the speakers that you've been listening to, and they've each been about 5-10 minutes-ish. So I do know that I'm trying your abilities to concentrate and take in information, particularly when it's as inspiring as Paul's rhetoric and as practical as Patrick's process. So I'm certainly not going to repeat anything that they have said, nor indeed do anything more than endorse what Carl said in his introduction to you all about the history of the Fed and what it's wanting to do now and what I believe it will do. Just a minute on me, though, in relation to volunteering, because I'm passionate about volunteering. And as Emma said in her introduction, you are the most incredible force for good as volunteers in our communities. And I hope that by what you do in your schools, you can encourage many more people to do that and to realise how much the skills of governance are undervalued and yet greatly needed in society. Of course, if you know anything about me, you'd say, well, I would say that because I volunteer for the Scouts and I'm the chair of the Scouts, and we are the largest youth volunteering, mixed youth volunteering engagement organisation, charity in the UK, and indeed, if you listen to Bear Grylls, worldwide. So yeah, I do believe volunteering is good. I don't think perhaps, though, volunteers realise just how important, how significant a voice somebody who, like yourselves, has in the way of influence rather than power. And I'm going to say something about that in relation to how I think you can get engaged in the way we take Fed forward. So a few points really that are perhaps a bit different and I hope complementary. Number one, and again, I can say this because I'm 68 years old now, I've definitely got more history behind me than I have future ahead of me, but I care very much about Carl's children and all the children that are in your care. I do think this idea of a long-term plan for education, its time has come. That's number one. I do think its time has come, and it's fantastic that the Fed have been a major campaigning voice for it. But be under no illusions, it's not the only voice. In fact, I've been on a number of these seminars, and you will perhaps know of other, and this is good, organizations pushing this door open. cynically, one of my colleagues, Ruth Silver, referred to the conflagration of commissions that we had around: a centenary commission, a right to learn commission, a future of the colleges of the future commission, or whatever, I don't know, and then things like Fed and all the rest of it. Actually, I think that's a very, very good thing, because another way of saying that is that there are people all over the system, not just the education system, the political system, the local government system, thinking about how we do things differently, and how we do things differently in education. So I think this is the right time for us to accelerate that and demonstrate that need for a long-term plan for education. So its time has come, and if not now, when, as somebody said. I do think the when, the now, is also linked to what is happening outside of the education system. And this is where I do my 3 C's. Climate change. You know, you can be in no doubt, having watched the antics in Cornwall, and I'm not just referring to the Prime Minister going in the sea or the rest of it, but, you know, it's high up the political agenda, 20 years too late, but nevertheless, climate change is at least being taken seriously. That's the first thing, and thank good. Second C, of course, is COVID, and these are global things, of course. COVID has changed everything, does change everything, just because of the impact of a pandemic. And my third C, and I did mean to have a quick look around, yeah, across quite a few haven't got your pictures up, but the third C is colour. It's colour, not many black faces here. Black Lives Matters, it's hit us. Again, 20 years too late, can't avoid it now. So to my mind, there's a confluence of really significant catalytic change making activities that make the idea that we should look at the education system and the role of all the players in it in a really creative but long-term and collaborative way. Actually, that could be another C. Collaboration has accelerated the pace of change and the way we do things, and the COVID response to COVID has shown that. So if I just end with a little bit about how I think you as governors can engage with this. It was one of the questions in the chat about, well, how do you future-proof a long-term education plan against political change? Well, one of the things you could do is to, I'm not going to say use an association like the NGA, because Emma, ashamedly, I don't know terribly much about exactly what you do, but what I do think we could consider is that the education plan could be held to account by the very people who are held to account for the governance of the schools. And would it be impossible to have we have a Citizens UK movement, would it be impossible to have a Governance UK movement? Perhaps you're going to tell me, Emma, that's what the NGA is, but that actually was an independent grouping of people who were the community cheerleaders for their schools, who were responsible for the long-term vision and plan of their individual schools, but that collectively could ensure that the long-term plan for education was being implemented, was being resourced, and was being measured. The impact of it was being measured. So I think there's lots of opportunity to think about the voice of governance in whatever accountable body we come up with to really help the plan be delivered. And I think the other thing I'd say in relation to this is how we, it's referred to really, but how we use you as governors, along with your head teachers and your MAT CEOs and you know, the collective that makes a school work, along with the parents and pupils, how we help you to become those, well, not to become, because you are, but to have the voice as the authors of your own stories of place. Because if we just get a one size fits all answer to the levelling up issue, which anyway is only an issue in England, it's not, you know, you don't talk about levelling up if you're in Scotland, and sorry if NGA, you're only England based, and if you are UK wide, forgive me, just didn't have time to do the research on you. But the reality is we should think carefully about not just embracing the political rhetoric of the moment. And we should really think about the leadership of place that was mentioned at the beginning of this, and is a work strand, which obviously I'm involved in. But the power that you have as leaders of those places, and the convening power you have as governors to use that and to tell the stories of your locality, of your children, of your parents, of your employers, so that we don't have a kind of one size fits all. I don't think it's impossible when you've got the brains of people like Patrick and many others around. I don't think it's impossible to put all that together in a very well, carefully constructed, process-oriented, project-managed kind of way, but for it to have real impact, and for the delivery of the education system in all its messiness, because we better not try and write a new system of education. You know, we've got what we've got. It's a dog's breakfast, but we've got it. So let's just make the maths work. Let's make the schools work. Let's make all those people that you're responsible for that are delivering, rather than try and design a new system. Let's work with the system we've got within the local government strictures we've got, with the changing patterns of locality, and get together and tell those stories of locality that put a 10-year plan for education, education and training and skills, I would say, I'm just using education as a shorthand, put that together in a way that can work. I wish I was only 18 rather than 68, because I'd like to see all this develop. So I hope I live a few more years longer, because I really, as I said at the beginning, feel the time is now. And if you want to get involved with us as governors on the leadership of place, development work stream, we will definitely make sure that we find a way of bringing that in. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne, Patrick and Paul. Back over to you, Emma.
Thank you all so much. Well, I think we're all going to sort of join as a panel and deal with some of the questions that have already come in, perhaps others that we will sort of stimulate along the way. So there's been a very general, you probably had a chance to see yourself, set of questions really about tell us a bit more about how governors and trustees could actually get involved. So there's a bit more about the sort of what can we tell you about, what would you like to know from us? And there was a stream which actually, Patrick, was very much what you then were talking about whose evidence. People were saying, but whose priorities, and who are you going to be listening to? And that topic that I know always comes up, and Carl, I've seen a number of events that you've done around the subject of how does politics work with this long-term education plan? And that point, you know, Paul, you were making about all the change from Secretary of States every couple of years. How realistic is it to say we're going to take, you know, the politicians out of this? So I think this is a really hard one, and it might be, Carl, you said right in the beginning of your introduction, everyone goes, oh, this is very hard, and I was probably one of them that went, love the idea, but actually that dynamic with politicians makes it a really, really hard thing to achieve. So there's another sort of perhaps set of questions around those, your 3 C's actually, Anne, but should we deal with some of those big things and then perhaps come back to the C's afterwards? Who wants to kick off?
Shall I kick off with the how involved, if that's all right. What I would say there is that become a member of the Fed. It's free. Just go on the website, register, and you get our weekly email address, letter on a Sunday, which then has in it loads of things to get involved with. And as we go through, as Patrick said, and as Anne said, the next 12 months, starting actually probably in about a month's time, it'll be July, but then starting kicking really in earnest in September, work streams engaged. And there'll be a range of events, most of which I've got to say are going to be online, but some will be physical as well, where people can get involved in the consultation and feed in point of view. And what we've talked about as well is more formal engagement with the NGA over that period. Events as well that members of the NGA can get involved with. So literally the from that perspective, and transparent, and everything we do, people can get engaged with. So it's an open house, and we'll probably agree some other dates, Emma, I would imagine, where we'll come back to NGA and ask for their specific involvement in certain things. And I'm sure Patrick, in terms of the work stream too, that he's co-chairing on really the structures to develop and govern a long-term education plan for the country. We'll be very keen to be involved more with the NGA and as we move forward. I have got something to say about the politics of the system, but I'll probably come in last and do that and give my other colleagues to come in and give their thoughts.
Grand. Does someone else want to jump in on any of those issues?
Oh, you're on mute.
Not anymore. Maybe just to a couple of thoughts that I think is a challenge that we all have. If I think about the many different aspects of doing business, living in the UK that I've been involved with, education is quite unique in the sense that everybody has been to school, and therefore everybody thinks they're an expert on education, and everybody has a point of view on education. So I think one of our big challenges in the work we're doing in the Fed is to listen brilliantly and generously, but actually reach some conclusions and recommendations that we can take to government that makes sense. I mean, if at the end of the day we cannot reach quality conclusions and make quality recommendations, then the politics will win over. I think we have a chance of influencing the politics, and indeed I think Carl and the team and colleagues have already made fantastic progress. One of our best champions, in fact somebody who's got ahead of us on this debate already, is Robert Alphen, who's the chair of the Education Select Committee, and he's now the loudest voice on a long-term strategy, and in fact he's got too far ahead of us, because we need to actually be in control and actually set out what that means. So I think, yes, we can influence politics if we bring something to them. If we bring 40 million different views to them, they will think it's the best menu ever delivered to the world of politics and choose from it what they wish. So the real challenge, and it's why what Patrick talked about is really important, is to listen to views, including of 1,000 governors. But we still have to distill those down into a small number of significant practical actions. And that's why I'd be placing a lot of emphasis on the vision, on the strategy, and on the governance model. If you get this right at 50,000 feet, there's a chance you can get it right as you get closer to ground level.
And I echo that, if I may just come in, Emma, because there was a question from Fiona Hammond: is a non-party political education strategy a possibility? Because different parties use that to drive their own priorities, ideologies, etc. If you do what Paul suggested, then actually, and look at the input we had from those former secretaries of state for education, as well as input we had from current political leaders. So we had Wes Streeting, we had Daisy Cooper from Labour and Lib Dems commenting on one of the Fed events. They're on the videos that were referred to that are available from the Fed website. I actually think that you could get a situation where education is so important, it stands above and outside of party political considerations, and that if, as a result of the work that the Fed's doing, as Paul says, there's some clear accountability mechanisms and some clear ways of working it, the politicians have to be persuaded into taking that on. And that's where the voice of governors and parents is so important, because actually, if you say we're signing up to this as well, it's really quite hard for politicians to ignore it these days, I think.
Thank you. Patrick, did you want to jump in?
Just add on to that, specifically the importance of the governor vote. I think the government wants to listen to people who don't have a personal agenda or gain, but still know about education. And I think governors are in a particularly advantageous position there. You know, volunteers who aren't engaged primarily from a political perspective, but to serve the school, the college, the pupils and the parents. And that's a voice with extraordinary integrity. It's also a voice that has extraordinary experience, because governors are aware of the disruption that is caused by change that hasn't been thought through properly. And governors also know the benefit of good planning in schools. So combine those things, it's a powerful voice, but it is a voice that is knowledgeable and has integrity. So we have to take that seriously and capitalize on it.
You know, that's so wonderful. You're all doing sort of NGA's job for me today, which is absolutely fabulous. But one of the reasons, though, why we are running the Visible Governance campaign, which we did start the month before COVID with a great bang, and then had to put on the back burner, was because I'm probably obsessed, but by the fact that, exactly as you say, the amount of work and knowledge that is out there with our 250,000 volunteers, and yet it doesn't get, quite frankly, enough of a profile, even within the education sector, let alone more broadly. And you only have to, you know, meet some of the you know, fantastic people that will be on this call and elsewhere to understand exactly what but you know, you've all been saying about what there is to bring to the debate. But it is, and it is quite hard to make that case. So absolutely, if by combining forces with you, that helps our case, of which I'm sort of well, I would be, wouldn't I, doing the role that I do, but you know, I'm absolutely convinced of the importance and thoughtfulness of what we hear. But one of the things that, obviously, running an organization like this, which is a charity, and therefore has to be non-party political, and clearly we've got people of all sorts of views and right across both the political spectrum, but every other possible spectrum you could think of. And one of the real challenges, but also, I have to say, interests in doing this job, is pulling all those together. And perhaps it's a bit similar to Fed, coming up with things where actually we do have a common voice, or almost a common voice. And I think we're getting to the point now. I think one of you said the time is right. I think it might have been you, Anne, for that plan. And certainly our conversations with governors and trustees over the last couple of years would suggest that was the case. And one of the things I think we found, and there was a real pull of comments at one point in the chat, about the fact that there's a bit of a danger that our education school system in England, so I'm being quite parochial here, is in danger of being divided into maintained schools and academy trusts. And NGA as an organisation speaks to both. We have members in both sectors. And actually, there's so much common ground there that the last thing we want as an organisation, and from the comments that people were making in the chat, the last thing they want is to be split apart, because actually we've all got a common purpose, haven't we, in terms of providing the best possible education for our children, no matter what schools they're in. So that might sound a bit as though I was getting on my soapbox, but I just wanted to reflect that strain of the conversation, which wasn't so much a question as a plea that while structures are important, we don't necessarily want to get hung up with those. I don't know whether anybody wants to comment on that, and if not, we could go on to the three or four C's as a point of discussion. But in the conversations you've been having, Carl, with others, how does that idea of we are all one school system fit with? Can you still hear me? I'm getting messages to say my audio is not working.
No.
Oh, you can still hear me.
It's okay.
Yeah. How is that conversation playing out with other people? Governors and trustees can't be the only folk saying, let's not get fixated about what school structure we're in. Let's keep thinking about the children and their future.
No, that's coming through very strongly, and as at a time now. In fact, to be honest with you, whenever I'm in conversation with colleagues at the DfE, and they from politicians quite clearly, that's what they're saying as well. There is a clear focus on that, whether or not potentially governance colleagues or indeed heads or CEOs across the country are feeling that necessarily in the regions on the ground. I think, you know, but there is a desire to want to focus on people really, because we're in a people profession. That's what, you know, ultimately. Many years ago I was on Radio 4, the advent of maths, and I am a math leader, and I was being asked, well, and I said, absolutely, business are looking after people. That's what I do. My job is about people. That's what we do in education. We're about people. Our products are people. But I think in terms of coming back before we go on to the 3 or 4 C's there and politics, and the plethora of questions quite right in the comments about, you know, divorcing politics from education is really difficult. Well, we've never really tried. And actually, Michael Barber and Tim Brighouse, for example, are very historians in education. And if you look back, and Michael Barber's done a few pieces of work with the Fed, there'll be a new piece of work that Michael Barber's doing coming out in October for the Fed, looking through the eyes of politicians and its narrative journey. And if you look at the narrative journey of education over a period of time, it's evolved. It's never really been planned nor organised. Now, I agree with Anne in saying that we have got what we got. And the way I speak to politicians in terms of whether they're the ruling party or whether they're a party looking to gain power, one might say, in the future, I say our 4 work streams that are effectively objectives of a longer term plan, structures and governance around a longer term plan, in place-based scenarios, and then inclusion around that. Those 4 work streams have come out of the 12 to 18 months consultation that we had. That's their power. That's what the system thinks we should have in our foundations. Now, if you look at the first 2 work streams, the like foundation, and the second 2 are like cement poured into the bricks. To describe to politicians that we're not looking to take power away from you. Indeed, our 12 ex-secretaries of state for education, and it's open to see, if you've got a spare 2 hours, listen to Branwyn Jeffries grill them last September.
That was really, very interesting. I can recommend that.
Fascinating watch. And listen, they all said, listen, when we got into the job, we thought we were in charge. And we all realised we weren't. There was no system to pull levers in. Now, they can say that when they're not in power anymore. Now, the reality is, I bet every Secretary of State that gets it realises and thinks, actually, they have got a vested interest in making sure they can pull better levers. more effective levers to change things are certainly in a five-year political sort of cycle. And our 4 work streams is they are the bricks and cement. And then you build your education on solid foundations. If you have control over the solid foundations, then from a politician's point, or national, metro mayors, mayors or politicians. And what you can do is in your assessment room or your accountability room or your governance, your leadership room or your teaching and learning room, you can start to change some things in there with the profession. But if it is built on solid foundations, round and round in circles, and I have reintroduced and scrapped the BTEC on 4 occasions as an education leader, all the waste that goes won't be waste anymore, because it will gradually be built up upon. And that argument is persuading politicians, and it's certainly persuading civil servants in the DfE and the Treasury and BIS.
Just maybe if I can,
Yeah, of course.
maybe if I can just build on that and actually lead into, I want to touch on 2 of the C's. I mean, the first is collaboration. And I think what Carol's talking about is very important. Our collective challenge is to reach a conclusion and common sense about education. If we cannot collaborate as communities of governors, business leaders, school principals, education policy people, there is no way forward. So our greatest challenge before we even worry about all the politics is whether we can get our act together as senior leaders in society. And I think we are yet to be tested on that. We're not short of passion, not short of enthusiasm. We're not short of really caring about our children. But are we prepared to collaborate to the extent necessary that we can reach conclusions is a big test over the next 12 months. And I do think the education sector is gifted and challenged by the sheer amount of passion and commitment to excellence. So that would be my point on collaboration. My point on colour is I'm devastated that Anne got that in and I missed it, because it is one of the great issues of our time in this country. When I chaired Teach First, 23% of all the best graduates we recruited to teach in the poorest schools came from Black, Asian, ethnic minority backgrounds. They were brilliant, and they will all end up at the highest levels in society. Of that, I have no doubt. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being a judge for the Black British Business Awards, 6 categories, and for each category, rising stars and senior leaders. Every single one of those Black people who I met, who I saw, I read about, every single one would be a gift as a school governor. Our challenge in this country is not shortage of talent. It's opening the door and attracting it and inviting it in. So when it comes to the issue of colour, if there's one thing I'm absolutely convinced about in where Anne's coming from, is we should look around every boardroom, every board of governors. And if we don't see a board of governors that reflects the community that we're representing as governors, we should be asking, what are we going to do about it? And now, not over the next 3-5 years. The issue, to my mind, is the talent is available. It's out there now. Let's work to fix it.
Brilliant. And in fact, we've been running a campaign called Everyone on Board, which is to try and encourage boards to recruit people both from underrepresented groups, but particularly Black, Asian and minority ethnic, but also actually younger age groups, because obviously, similar with charity trustees, our average age of governorship is 55. And actually, if I can say, maybe throw it back to us as a panel, we are all white on this panel. We're all of an age. So perhaps it'd be interesting to know what you as Fed are doing to try and engage with not just Black educators, Asian educators, but also more broadly. So we've got a report, and by the way, I'm not being holier than thou here at all. I wrote a blog last September about the frustration of not having made as much change with Everyone on Board as we had hoped, and we've got another report out at the end of the month on exactly this topic.
Emma, we don't need any more reports. We need to get.
Don't tell me that. I don't tell me that to the 1st of July. Just do it. Yeah. But you see, Paul, then it's about how you create change, isn't it? And which is what you're trying to do and what we're trying to do. So now this will be our big one and only. And after that, it absolutely is action. In fact, the main author, Kirsty Ebb, says that to me all the time, but we need to do stuff. But it would be, and the other point I think was about pupils. And again, that's a topic I know a lot of school governors and trustees are thinking about. How do they engage with pupil voice more? And there was a response. And to your comments about actually what we're hearing from pupils is a lot around climate and sustainability, but also about well-being and mental health. And that really does chime with what we hear more generally. So you're both those things really. How are you engaging with pupil voice as well as with the Black and Asian community? And actually, I think I've just seen something pop up in the chat about parents. I mean, that's huge, but it's such a high bar you've set yourself. And obviously we want to help, but any thoughts?
No, I can come in and say, how we in the coming months. Each of our work streams will have a steering group, and as we've already said, Anne and Patrick are co-chairing one of the works each. They will, on that steering group, that will be fairly small, about 10 people on each, but they'll be representative of some parents and leaders, etc., from community people on those groups. But more importantly, beneath those, we're going to launch in about a month's time. We've already got a couple in operation. Paul co-chairs a business leaders steering group for the Fed, for example, and we have an education leader for the Fed as well. But we're going to have 7 steering groups, or stakeholder groups, you say, all together. And they're going to have about between 15 and 30 people on them. And they're going to help us focus from the different areas there that you've talked about. There's a parents and carers group. There's a young, they have already got co-chairs and we're populating them. There's an education researchers group, and there's a teachers and practitioners group as well. So stakeholders from that point of view, and by the way, education leaders group, and we've got representatives from the governance sector there. So they will come together to act as like larger focus groups and to help us populate our work in the work stream. Diversity goes, we've been pretty keen on this right from the start. And if you go onto the Fed website and see the people in, quite diverse from that point of view, and we actively pursue that. It's not something we actively pursue that from that point of view, and that will continue to be the case. And Network of Women Ed are partners of the Fed.
Great, thank you. Now I'm conscious we probably only have about 5 minutes left, so I've probably missed out some really good questions. What I'm going to promise to do is make sure you get all the comments as well anyway afterwards, if you don't get a chance to save them yourself, Carl. But I'm just wondering whether the panel, some of you have also been following what's said. Are there any issues that you particularly want to pick out and feel we haven't done justice to? Anne, was there anything you wanted to follow up on?
Just very briefly, it is an idea to, I think, approach and use those living former secretaries of state and have them work collectively in the interests across all parties. None of them particularly, most of them are in the House of Lords, although not all, but to have them really act as I haven't quite got the words for what they might act as, but stewards or guardians, as well as promoters of you've got to take the politics out of education in that sense. So I think I would say we need to explore quite creatively how we might use those voices and their access and their understanding of all the different component parts of an education system, so that actually I could see them working with you as the NGA, and the voice of governors being a part of that. It would only be a question of how we make that happen. But I'm very keen that the Fed doesn't lose their leadership and their interest in this, because the realities of change are that you do need those sorts of people to help you make that change and to take this forward. And Robert Halfon, as Paul has said, is great, but that's because Robert Halfon's a campaigner as well. We need that balance of establishment stroke campaigning.
Thank you. Patrick, is there anything you wanted to add or comment on? Just in our last minute.
I would just say, listening to this again, I'm very optimistic that we're engaged in something which is very positive and can have a positive effect. It isn't necessarily thinking that we're going to end up with a perfect plan with all things agreed by all parties. That's not going to happen. Politics won't come out of education, but we can possibly try and help politicians understand that improving education for everybody can be built on some objective thinking, can be built on collaboration, and that the way we manage the system is almost as important as the change that we make. In the end, great schools exist in this country, led by great leaders with brilliant teachers. We need to have more of those, and one of the ways is to make sure that they have more responsibility within an agreed framework. That means greater trust, and it means less, micromanagement and less frequent change. And there has to be agreement around that if we can sustain our campaign.
Great, thank you. Paul, have you got any final thoughts?
In a minute, two thoughts. First, I would encourage every school governor to shout loudly and enthusiastically our thanks and appreciation for all of our teachers who've been doing a fantastic job going to work every day during COVID and looking after children. And I think we don't do enough to praise and appreciate our teaching community. And secondly, I'll tell you all confidentially, the best trustees I had in Teach First were under 35 years old, and they were either coming from the teaching community or out of the Teach First program, and they were as diverse as you can get. But obviously that's in confidence.
Absolutely, we absolutely push educators on board, and actually I keep nagging Teach First as well, because you've got those fantastic ambassadors there. So it's just reminded me to go back to them. Use your Teach First ambassadors more. And then, as is appropriate, the final word to Carl before we draw this to a close.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks so much to everybody staying on. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. You've all had busy days, I'm sure, and I'm really encouraged with the volume of chat that's coming through on the chat. Very interesting indeed. Please get involved. I know I'll be talking to Emma about how we get more involved with the NGA. We've already been significantly involved with you so far, and we keep up to speed with each other. But please feel free to. I've had a colleague contact me from the Fed team to say that there are lots of emails come in the last couple of hours. So thank you very much for that active support, so to speak, and keep an eye out for that regular Sunday email that comes out, and get involved with what we're doing. And Emma, thanks so much for inviting the four of us to share what the Fed is and what our hopes are for the Fed with NGA over the last hour and a half. Thank you.
So it's been an absolute pleasure to host you. Thank you so much. As you say in the chat, there are people saying we want to get involved. We want to take this conversation further. I'm sure we will be. So thank you to those of you and all the work you're doing at Fed for coming and sharing that today. And also thank you to our members for being enthusiastic enough after a really heavy week to turn up to talk about a long-term education plan for doing the best for our pupils and our country. So thank you again for what you do, and I hope to see you at another event. Enjoy the rest of the summer if I don't see you again. Thank you so much, and goodbye.